so that everybody is aware in the spirit of this session. So welcome once again. My name is Stuart Campo. I'm the team lead for data responsibility here at the Center for Humanitarian Data in The Hague. And we're really thrilled. Sorry, I'm just making sure you can see my screen, which I don't think you can at the moment. 1 second. Let's try that again. Here we go. So we're thrilled to be here along with the other co-chairs of the Data Responsibility Working Group. So that's DRC, IOM, and UNHCR, hosting this session on data responsibility in practice, lessons learned from implementing the IASC operational guidance on data responsibility. We also are really grateful to the organizers of HNPW for giving us space for this important conversation, and grateful to all of our members who are joining us today, as well as all of you in the audience who we hope will share your own experience in different actions for data responsibility in the contexts where you're working. I'll just give you a quick overview of the structure of the session, and then we'll dive right in. We want to save as much time for the panel and the subsequent discussion as possible. So I'll give you a quick overview of the Data Responsibility Working Group in case you're not familiar with this group. And then I'll hand over to my colleague Rochelle to give an overview of the IASC operational guidance on data responsibility. Following that overview, we will dive into a panel discussion where we have 3 experts from different member organizations who will share different examples of data responsibility in practice. The idea in that panel discussion is for us to first hear from the different colleagues about the examples that they've chosen to share, and then give you all a chance to ask follow-up questions or clarifying questions about these different examples of the actions that are part of the operational guidance that really help us ensure the safe, ethical, and effective management of data in different operational settings. In the final portion of this session, we'll then move into a slightly higher level reflection together on different strategies for implementation of data responsibility. So moving a little bit up from the individual actions to overall approaches for organizations, clusters, sectors, and the broader humanitarian community on how we can tackle this complex but really critical space together. So once again, thank you for joining us, and we're really looking forward to a rich discussion over the next 55 minutes. So just to give you a quick context also in the setting of HNPW, we wanted to explain what the Data Responsibility Working Group is. Really coming out of the process of developing the operational guidance on data responsibility, which was endorsed in February of last year, we wanted to maintain a structure at a global level to bring together different organizations working on humanitarian response and interested in supporting data responsibility as a part of that. So we formed the DRWG, which is an open body open to any organization active in either the coordination and or implementation of humanitarian action, and currently have just over 20 members, which you'll see the logos of on the screen here, which shows you the breadth and depth of our membership already. We're particularly keen to hear from new organizations in different operational settings if they'd like to join this group and bring their expertise and experience. And we would welcome you to reach out either as part of this session or directly to the Center for Humanitarian Data following this session to learn more about how your organization can be involved. As you see here, we have a really good mix of UN entities, non-governmental organizations, sort of hybrid entities, including a few clusters, as well as the Red Cross and Red Crescent movement. So we really encourage broad membership and would hope as one concrete action out of this session that if you don't see your organization's logo on the screen, you reach out to us for a discussion about how you can get involved. The commitment is relatively light because this is a global coordination body. So what we're looking for from new organizations is just to identify a focal point within the organization who can join our quarterly member meetings, who can participate in selected activities that the DRWG has identified in order to support the coordination and implementation of data responsibility in different settings, and then to bring your expertise and resources to the table. So that's the commitment that we request. You can learn more through a form that we will share the link to in the chat and also reach out directly to me and my colleagues here at the center at the email address that you see on the screen. So I'll share this information again at the end of the session, but we really do hope to hear from new interested organizations following this discussion. With that, Rochelle, I will hand over to you to give us an overview of the operational guidance.
Thank you, Stuart, and welcome again, everyone. Just to check that you can hear me. Thumbs up? Yes, thank you. So I'll get us started on the substance by saying a few words on the operational guidance itself, as this is really the anchor for our event today, and some of the colleagues joining us may be hearing about it for the first time. So this IASC operational guidance on data responsibility is the first ever system-wide framework for data responsibility in the humanitarian sector. And as I'm sure we can all appreciate, this is really a significant milestone, since we know that individuals and communities can be helped by our data and our data activities, but they can also be harmed. So as mentioned by Stuart, the guidance was endorsed by the IASC and released in February 2021, following a year-long effort by over 20 organizations under the results group 1 of the IASC. There was also a public survey and an open feedback process with over 250 submissions. So this is really truly our collective document. So what is the operational guidance all about? You see here on the slide that there are 4 main sections: the background, rationale, and approach, the principles, the actions, and the annexes. We'll have a look at each section as a way to present the guidance overall. The first section really sets the scene. So it provides an overview of data responsibility, along with its challenges and opportunities in the concrete case of humanitarian action. It scopes the guidance to operational data and identifies the target audience for it. And perhaps most importantly, this is where the guidance provides a few key definitions, including what is, to the best of my knowledge, the first shared, agreed upon definition of data responsibility. As you see here, responsible data management is defined as being safe, ethical, and effective. This is the magical trio. Each of these terms is defined and connects data responsibility to data security, ethical standards, human rights, and very importantly, the purposeful implementation of data management activities. The definition also helps us because it clarifies that data responsibility is about both personal data and non-personal data, while at the same time acknowledging that personal data remains to be managed in accordance with established frameworks for the processing of personal data. The second section of the guidance presents a set of principles for data responsibility. These principles set a strong foundation for operational data management to be done in a way that reinforces and enables our commitment to do no harm and to put people at the center of all our activities, including our work with data. Each principle is explained so they can be more easily applied in practice and truly guide our decisions about what we do and what we don't do, when, with whom, and where. And by proactively looking to these principles to guide us, we can better minimize the risks and maximize the benefits of data management in humanitarian settings. And this balancing language is something you'll find often in the guidance. The third section of the guidance presents 8 areas of action for data responsibility. One could say that this is kind of the heart of the operational guidance, as these 8 areas of action are the how we get from the theory of I want to do data responsibly to the concrete practice of doing so. As you can see here, the areas include actions like conducting a data responsibility diagnostic, conducting a data impact assessment, which is a bigger, more broader version of the data protection impact assessment, establishing information sharing protocols along with data and information sensitivity classifications, setting up SOPs for data incident management, etc., etc. These actions are really our greatest leverage point to do data responsibility, and they're considered minimums to realizing it in practice. The operational guidance goes one level deeper. It sets out these 8 areas of action and then looks at the specific actions to take at 3 levels of the response in a given setting. We have actions at the system-wide level, at the cluster, sector level, and at the organization level. And in the tables, you'll also see that the roles and responsibilities of specific actors are also fleshed out to make this as practical and concrete as possible. So the panelists we have with us today will be sharing their experience in implementing some of these areas of action at the different levels. Finally, the fourth and final section of the guidance is the annexes. This is where you'll find a number of helpful things, and I'll flag 2 annexes now. The first one, definitions and Annex A. We all know how hard it can be to make progress on data responsibility or on any issue when we don't have a shared vocabulary. So this annex provides definitions for over 30 key terms to support better conversations about data responsibility across all functions and levels. Second, in Annex B, we have templates and tools. We all want to implement data responsibility. We all want to have principled and ethical approaches. How do we do this? So in the guidance, you'll find templates to help you implement the 8 areas of action. You have the list here of the templates available for information sharing protocols, for data asset registries, SOPs for data incident management, et cetera, et cetera. So this was a, albeit short, but hopefully helpful overview of the IASC operational guidance itself. Let's shift now to see how this guidance has helped and been used by practitioners in the field to implement data responsibility in the context of a response. So Stuart, over to you to lead us through the panel discussion. Thank you.
Brilliant. Thanks so much, Rochelle, and thanks for that excellent overview of the operational guidance. I will stop sharing my screen momentarily, but just wanted to show this slide to introduce our panel, and then you'll see them in living color momentarily. So we're really thrilled to have 3 different DRWG member organizations represented on the panel today, starting with Naina Das, who is the head of research at Impact Initiatives. You might also know them as REACH. Then we have Luis Hernando Aguilar Ramirez, who is the Senior Information Management Officer from the Global Health Cluster. And finally, my colleague Jos Behrens, who's the Data Responsibility Officer with the OCHA Center for Humanitarian Data. So I will stop sharing my screen so that you can see them all on the panel. And I will also try to make sure that we've got the most panel-y view here. So yeah, you should see the 4 of us. Naina, your view is slightly cutting off. I see about half of your face right now, but we can also spotlight you in the panel now. So let's just dive right in, and hopefully the video will adjust itself. So as Rochelle was just explaining, the operational guidance sets out these 3 different levels for actions for data responsibility. What we'd like to do to get this panel started is go around the table, starting with Naina from the organizational level perspective, then moving to Luis for the cluster sector level, and then finally to Jos for that system-wide level. I would encourage people to drop any questions you have into the chat. And of course, if you want to save your questions for the final portion of the session, which are maybe more focused on broader strategy, feel free to do that. But we'll be monitoring the chat throughout the rest of this session. So Naina, I know REACH has, of course, a rich range of experience implementing actions for data responsibility in the context of your operational data management across different response environments. We'd love to hear a few concrete examples from you about what this looks like in practice. So over to you to get the discussion started.
Thanks, Stuart, and hi, everyone. I see on the chat that someone says I'm in full view, so hopefully the video issue resolved itself. So yeah, as Stuart said, so I'm Naina, I'm from Impact Initiatives, more popularly known for one of our initiatives called REACH. So at REACH, of course, we are collecting large volumes of data since the beginning. So data responsibility is not an option. It's something we have to kind of mainstream in our work and how we collect data and how we process it, and ultimately, of course, make that accessible to decision makers. So in terms of like what that looks like in practice, I think Catherine did a very good recap of the different principles and actions, but maybe I'll talk through a few of those more practically. So I guess a few years back already was when we kind of said, okay, we are, we're sitting on these large piles of data we collected, and we need to be kind of conscious of the do no harm principle and what that means. So around 2019 is when we did our kind of first attempt to do an internal SOPs on data management. And it was at the time just getting the ball rolling in three areas on risk assessment. So really kind of starting at the design stage and thinking, what does it mean to collect all this data? Do you even need to collect it, whether that's direct or indirect identifiable information? And if you do need to collect it, if the benefit outweighs the risk, what concrete steps will we take through the research process as we go along to kind of make sure that we're managing this data in the most ethical and effective way possible? Starting from that, of course, we also then went into conversations about data sharing and what that means. And this is when we kind of started liaising with Stuart and his team at the data center, specifically with regards to kind of large exercises that reached us, which has a lot of interest with multiple stakeholders. For example, you can say the multi-sector needs assessments that REACH helps to facilitate to inform different HPC crises, HPC contexts. This involves multiple stakeholders, multiple users, a lot of time pressure, which means you have maybe a week sometimes with the end of data collection to prepare your data set, make sure you're confident that everything has been kind of treated, corrected, managed properly, and then make that accessible to people who actually need to use it for the needs analysis. So this was kind of our starting point as like a case, if you will, of talking also with the HDX team in terms of what does that mean to really ensure all of this is being done as responsibly as possible. And slowly we start building some like internal tools and guidelines to make that happen. I mean, I'm conscious of time, so I won't go into like too much detail, but maybe one thing that has come out of this, especially I think also since the release of the operational guidance, that has of course created a system-wide understanding that data responsibility is kind of a collective responsibility, so that it's not just upon REACH as the data collectors, which of course holds the accountability to make sure all that data is managed properly, but we see a lot of kind of partners also understanding the concept of data sharing agreements if you share something that goes beyond what should be publicly accessible, which of course sometimes is necessary because you might have microdata that's needed by certain actors to do some analysis, which they will not find in a more high-level aggregated anonymized data set. So I think one big kind of step forward has been in terms of kind of maybe collectively raising this awareness. And we do see that more and more, especially since last year, there is this like uptake on the concept of a data sharing agreement, even among our partners, whereas maybe 2 years ago, we would be questioned as to why somebody needs to sign a data sharing agreement. So I think that kind of has really been a bit of a shift that we can see. The other kind of aspect, at least internally for us, is to start standardizing a bit our data sharing practices as well. And then again, starting with a big package like the REACH multi-sector needs assessments, we are working again with the data center team, Center for Humanitarian Data team, however you call yourself, to have like a joint kind of guidance on what do we do to publish our data on HDX as well, to make sure, of course, it's reaching as wide of an audience as possible, but we're not kind of doing any harm in the process. So I think that's been kind of in a very big nutshell, like some of the key concrete steps we've been taking. And I think a lot of the awareness and collective responsibility that we're seeing is, of course, thanks to some of the work that's been done, by the data responsibility working group. So that's, I can say at least we see that in practice. Maybe I will just quickly say what we want to like prioritize a bit going forward as well, because there has been a lot of progress. But I think two kind of areas, something we've been thinking about a lot is more focusing on maybe the effective management part of the definition of data responsibility. So with kind of assessments or data sets like the REACH MSN is extremely rich in information, but often maybe not doing justice to all the information that is being collected because it's used for a primary purpose, which is needs analysis. But there is an importance, and one of the principles, I guess, also within the guidance to make sure there's like maximum benefit and utilization of all this data as well is also part of data responsibility, right? People are giving us time from their day to tell us about issues, to tell us about things. So even if it meets the primary purpose, we need to really make sure that that data set is maximized to its full potential. And part of making all the data accessible on HDX helps us achieve that. And the second thing, for now, our focus very much has been on kind of large household surveys or large individual surveys, which of course is where the biggest kind of concerns lie, mainly because of personally identifiable information with microdata. But we're also starting to think a bit more about a large part of our work also involves settlement level kind of key informant interviews, which also needs a specific kind of approach to data management. In terms of maybe like the types of questions we're asking key informants to answer, the type of data we record on their behalf in terms of metadata, etc. So kind of thinking that through that a bit more. And also for our lesser known initiative, which is called PANDA, which involves a lot more bilateral research, I guess. It's more proprietary research, like third-party monitoring, for example, directly with the specific partners, specific agencies. This does not involve wide sharing of data because it's only for the partner on whose behalf we do that research, but it still needs some consideration of responsible management and sharing of data. So this is something, once we figure out everything with REACH, we also need to think about our kind of this other work stream, which typically involves mostly bilateral sharing with donors and specific agencies, but it still means a lot of people within that donor agency or like a UN agency still has access to all this data, and often it also involves, of course, the beneficiary information and so on. So we have to be like more quite careful about how we manage that as well. I think I will stop there. I hope I stayed in the time mark, but I'd be curious to hear what the others have to say as well.
Brilliant, Naina. That's, really an excellent set of reflections to get us started. I think it's also really telling that in this specific example around needs assessments, you covered at least 4 of the 8 recommended actions in different ways. One shows how complex coordinated needs assessments are and then how difficult but also critical the work is that you and your team do. But also it shows the interconnectedness of the humanitarian data ecosystem and these different actions, how they can complement each other, and also how we can sort of look at across these different levels that are in the operational guidance, seeing how to build synergies and also realize efficiencies, because we know that everybody is flat out. We know that everybody already has too much work on their plate. And we want to think about these actions for data responsibility as enhancing and integrating into existing processes. We are not trying to introduce a whole new set of activities or actions that will become a burden. We're trying to actually help streamline, and to your point, Naina, support more effective as well as safe and ethical management of data in humanitarian action. So this is really a great start to the discussion. I do want to acknowledge the one question that was dropped into the chat. We will certainly come to that, but for now, we'll continue with the panel discussion just to give us a good basis for our discussion later in the session. So Luis, building on the organization level, over to you for the cluster perspective.
Thank you, sir. Good morning, everybody. Good afternoon. Okay, but we work at with the Global Health Cluster. We are a unit that provides support to all the 31 clusters activated worldwide in different activities, like the regular activities for the cluster, particularly in health response. So I want to share like our experience on having the protocols activated from the very beginning of the emergency. The example that I want to share with all of you is Ukraine. During the very beginning of the Ukraine crisis, we provided support to the Ukrainian health cluster on coordination and activation of the regular tools that we use in the a framework that we named the Public Health Information System and Standards. So while the team in the field was evacuating the countries and moving around for security issues, we was establishing an improvement, the connection and the configuration of all the information management mechanisms that is used or must be used during the crisis. And that was a very interesting experience. On that, we have some the different data sets that should be protected by like in previous experiences. So we needed to be sure which information is that, who must get access to that information, and how can we sure that the person that we share the information knows that this information is sensible. So in our previous experience during the Syria war, we are aware that the not all the parts of the conflict follow the rules of the war. So we have a monitoring system for attacks on health facilities, attacks on health mission. So it is clear that one of the counterparts in this conflict also have experience in the Syria crisis, and the systematic attack to the health facilities happened. And the risk of having the same situation here is still something that is a big concern. So our question was, okay, how can we safely share the information and inform the people that we are sharing the information that this information is sensible or this data should be not publicly available. So the example that I want to share is the health facilities database. We have different counterparts working together to produce the database of health facilities at different level. You know, level 1, level 2, level 3 that are in different places worldwide. But in Ukraine, we have the data set and the existence of the protocols for data sharing helped us to reinforce the importance of this information. And not only that, but it also allows us to share the information in a safe or more safe way, meaning that the people is sensible that this information should not be shared publicly, and even the accessibility to that data is not that easy for the counterparts to use. Something that happened in the past in other contexts is that for protection issues, the health facilities share the location, latitude, and longitude with the counterparts of the conflict for them to respect that areas. But that when the combatants don't follow the rules of war, that will be information that will be used for harm when it should be used for protection. So in this case, and thanks for the data sensitivity protocol, we were able to share the information in a more secure way. We were sure that the information is a properly tagged. You know, we have a tag, we have a data sensitivity tag in each data set, and also the restriction to accessibility to that information was in place. For example, having access to the health facilities data set in HDX, you need to follow some processes to identify yourself as a humanitarian counterpart. So what we have here is the humanitarian ecosystem, the humanitarian digital ecosystem is complex. Nayana told us like the complexities on assessments, but in all the humanitarian response, we have different systems with different people, different organization. We have people that moves from one team to other, and also we have people that is handing over their work to other people. And that is a risk on data sensitivity because perhaps at the beginning you can receive some information and you will not have the. I mean, for you, it's clear that there is sensitivity, but if it's not properly tagged, you will not. When you hand over the information, the new person will not be aware that this information that is sensible. So it was very good for us on this specific topic. First, to have the protocols from the very beginning. I mean, it was less than 1 week after the humanitarian response got reactivated in Ukraine that we have the access to that. Also, something that is very important is it was based on the principles of data sensitivity, but also it was something that we can negotiate and discuss. I mean, it's not written in stone, but it's something that is for operational purposes. But because at the very beginning we have some restrictions on data sharing that happen that make us hard to coordinate. But using like anonymization or using like this kind of agreement, internal agreement with the partners, we were able to adapt to our reality. And also, I think that it's important to mention that is the awareness of the responsibility, like the personal responsibility for each information manager, for each person that have access to the information, to take some measures to protect the data that is being shared with them or that they can share with us. So in the case of the health cluster, this is one example that on how is important for everybody to have this sensitivity and accessibility protocol to share information, to provide access to the information, and to, because in Ukraine is an example, but also Ethiopia and other places, the access to information is vital, is crucial for the combatants and for the humanitarians. So we need, as humanitarians, we need to follow the rules and we need to protect our people, even protecting the information that we have from them. That is my comment. Over to you, sir.
Thank you, Luis. That was really a great example to share, and of course, very timely. I know a number of colleagues on the line are involved either on the ground or remotely in supporting the response in and around Ukraine. So hopefully many people have also seen that classification that you've referred to. We will, of course, share a set of examples as follow-up to this session with links where available to different documents and resources, and that will include the sensitivity classification Luis was describing. I wanted to pick up on one point, Luis, that you just made near the end there before handing over to Jos, which is that we want to do this work because it's critical to protection and the delivery of assistance, but also protecting the data and information of affected people is now part and parcel to protecting them writ large. We recognize this as a sector, and I think what was one of the major achievements of developing the operational guidance was getting that high-level recognition that people's data must be protected just as they must be protected themselves. And so we really see both the principles in the operational guidance and the actions that we've defined as critical to that mission. So we really hope that through these examples and discussions like this, colleagues understand just how critical this work is, not only for populations affected by crisis, but also for staff on the ground. And I think we see increasingly the risks that are posed to frontline operators, both in terms of collecting and managing data, but also just in how the management of sensitive data can expose them to additional risk. So it's a constant balancing act of trying to understand and mitigate the risks, while, as Nina and Luis both mentioned, optimizing the use of data as much as possible to inform better delivery of assistance. So we'll move now to Jos to give us that system-wide view with one or two examples of some recent work that he has been supporting. And then I'll keep an eye on the chat for questions, but I already have a number of questions that I'd like to dig into a bit farther with the panelists, so we won't have any challenges there. But Jos, over to you.
Great, thank you, Stuart. And maybe it's worth mentioning that rather than me, we were actually planning to have our colleague Shannon O'Hara, who is a humanitarian affairs officer with OCHA, join this panel to give more of a perspective from a country office. She unfortunately couldn't make it at the very last minute, and so that's why I'm stepping in. And it's good to be here. What I'll be focusing on is the action of developing an information sharing protocol. And as Stuart said, I'll really look at that at the system-wide level within a response. For those of you who are not yet familiar with what an information sharing protocol is, it relates to some of the areas that Luis was also touching on. So data sensitivity, regulating how data is shared. And it's really meant at the system-wide level to be the foundation for a collective approach to responsible data and information exchange. So really a key document to get in place and touching all areas of a response. A typical ISP will contain a context-specific data and information sensitivity classification, setting out the different layers of sensitivity for data and information. It will also articulate common actions to take across a response. It contains clauses on personal data protection, which is an area that Nina also just mentioned. And it will contain information on how to handle breaches to the protocol, among various other areas that are covered in such a document. I'll go a bit more specifically into the example of how we at the Center for Humanitarian Data supported our colleagues at OCHA Somalia, the OCHA Somalia office, in developing collaboratively in that response such an information sharing protocol. And I'll first look at why that document was developed, then I'll look a bit at how we went about it, what was in the document, the impact so far, and then any advice that we can give to colleagues on the call if they want to pick up the task or challenge of completing an information sharing protocol themselves. So first of all, the why. Why would you, as a response or an office, choose to work on an information sharing protocol? Typically, what we hear is that more and more there are questions around what data should be considered sensitive, as well as requests for information on how data should be shared. And this is also something Luis just covered on. In more and more responses, this becomes really an issue of concern. And so that's a clear need. An information sharing protocol can respond to that need by providing clarity on how data and information should be shared. So through the different elements that I just mentioned. Then how such a document is developed. For a system-wide information sharing protocol, what's really needed is a very collaborative approach. So the way it's described in the IASC operational guidance is that this process should really be led by either an intercluster or intersector coordination mechanism together with the information management working group, then brought up for endorsement by the humanitarian country team, and finally, all of the actors in the response should be briefed on the contents of the information sharing protocol. That's also how it went in the Somalia response. So in Somalia, we first supported the OCHA Somalia office on getting to a first draft, a very rough draft of the document. That was then shared with the information management and assessments working group, is what it's called in Somalia. And then we worked together with the intercluster coordination group, after which the document was presented to the HCT for endorsement, and then we briefed all of the different actors in the response. So this is really the typical way of going about developing such a document. What was contained in the document? Well, it was based on the IASC template. So it's the different elements that I just mentioned, an information and data sensitivity classification, as well as some specific areas for action for the Somalia response to further develop. Importantly, the information sharing protocol in Somalia does not replace any other existing guidance. So it really builds on and complements guidance that was already in place from the different clusters, as well as various data sharing agreements that actors in the response had put in place. So it's not meant to overrule, but rather to complement existing guidance and to really build on that. Then the impact of the document so far. First of all, going through the process of developing an information sharing protocol, so this collaborative process really helps align actors and create a common understanding across the response. So that goes for both sort of key terms that are used. The way we use a term like sensitive data can really differ among our organizations. So speaking through that together in developing an ISP is really helpful in itself. Then another part of the impact is that partners have started to align their internal practices with the information sharing protocol, so bring alignment across different actors. And then specific to Somalia, it also has helped further conversations with the government on collaboration regarding the responsible data and information exchange. So that was a key specific area of impact. Another area of impact that we typically hear that an ISP can help establish is the providing the confidence for sharing data. So these documents are not just about restricting the sharing of data, but also being very clear on when data should be shared. Again, the effective in safe, ethical, and effective. So by giving that confidence, it can help unlock a lot of data that would otherwise not be shared. I think I'm getting up to time, so I think I'll leave it at that, Stuart. So maybe back over to you.
Perfect. Thanks, Jos. And I think that's a really nice rounding up of this initial part of the panel in terms of giving people the perspective of how the actions are implemented at the different levels, but also how they interact. You know, as you were just describing, in a lot of contexts, we've seen these protocols serve as the basis for follow-up action at both the cluster sector and organizational level. And so there's a laddering up and down here, which really builds through collaboration to get the most out of these actions for data responsibility. In the interest of time, I want to just do one quick round of follow-up questions, building on the questions in the chat, and then we'll shift into the final portion of the session where we'll reflect with some of our co-chairs on strategies for implementation more broadly. So Nina, you probably have seen the question in the chat here from Eugenia from UNICEF, which is whether there are any special considerations regarding data for and about children. And I'd like to sort of broaden that slightly just to ask you how REACH/impact initiatives thinks about particular specificities or vulnerabilities that different groups might have and that we might need to take into account when thinking about responsible data management.
Yeah, thanks, Stuart and Eugenia. It's definitely an area we're still learning. I guess it's the way forward part of what we need to do. But maybe a couple of reflections specifically on children, and then I'll comment a bit on kind of other vulnerabilities to take into consideration as well. Generally, as an organization, we're quite conservative about kind of the collection and processing of data with and about children, simply because we do not have in-house child protection expertise. So we are conscious that if it's not done kind of properly, we risk doing more harm than good by sending in data collectors who don't have the necessary training to start asking random pieces of information from children. So we have kind of a conservative approach, a bit of a decision tree where all our teams kind of reflect when that's absolutely necessary. And if that's kind of the approach that we're taking, then some specific additional protocols that need to be put in place during the data collection and as well as the processing. So that's kind of as a kind of general approach in terms of when we try to collect data, mostly with children, I would say. Now, about children, coming back to the example of the multi-sector needs assessments, all of them typically would have a part at the start, which is like a demographic household roster. So here you have individual loops about all the household members and kind of capturing information that would be useful for the analysis. So in the case of children, that would be their age, depending on the age, then also whether they're currently enrolled in school, and a few other additional details. What we would then typically share is the aggregated information from those loops. So instead of having one column saying child 1, child 2, child 3 for each person in the household, you would have in this household one record saying number of children of this age group or number of children of ongoing age in those different age groups. Of course, we've had partners come back to us saying they do need the individual loop, especially partners that work with that kind of individual level data. So we're finding the best way to make that kind of more accessible, but typically our approach has been a bit more conservative in terms of what we share. I hope that answers the question. Stuart, what was your question again? Sorry.
I think that does answer the question, and mine was just sort of generalizing it a bit, but in the interest of time, I think we'll take your response as also slightly generalizable, right? You have a very clear approach for identifying and addressing the risks that different groups, demographic, et cetera, might face, and that's reflected in your processes. So that's really great. And I think a critical part of what we refer to in the operational guidance as designing for data responsibility, as well as conducting data impact assessments. So thanks very much for that example, Nina. And Eugenia, I'd welcome you to share the link in the chat for the Responsible Data for Children initiative, because of course this is a tremendous resource for much more reflection, guidance, and case studies on children's data specifically. So Luis, coming quickly to you then, I think you already described quite well how the work in Ukraine and similar work in other contexts is dynamic rather than one-off, right? This is not a matter of completing a process and being done. This is really an ongoing reflection in terms of how you manage data sensitivity. Could you talk a little bit more about sort of practically what that looks like? How often are you and your colleagues in the Ukraine Health Cluster discussing sensitivity, and what does it look like to kind of keep an eye on this or keep a finger on the pulse of how the context is changing and how that affects what sensitivity levels need to be assigned to different data types?
Sure, Stuart. Yes. Well, all the time we have this, the level of, the sensitivity, but also the operational. For operational purposes, when you have like a peaceful world where everybody is helping and everything, you can share everything everywhere. But that not happen, no? And we have operational challenge when you need to close the access to some data, to some information, and to verify who is there and what is that. So in my personal experience, not only in Ukraine but in other contexts, I think that first it's important to advocate for the security and the importance of having proper protocols on information sharing. You know, all the time you will find people that says, "Oh, it doesn't matter." I mean, who will do that? I mean, you know, I can imagine the army coming to our database and doing some hacking or whatever to get our data. No, no, so all the time you need to advocate for the people to be aware that we have responsibility on data management. And they say, okay, but if we do these security issues and we address the thing, the access to the information will not be fast, and it will be more complicated, and that you will need to spend time, managing all these information accessibility issues. But I said, okay, it's something that we need to do. It's something that the coordination must do. We need to have people to train or to provide capacity and to provide time and actions to be sure that the information is properly shared. And that is not easy because we have operational challenges and we have operational objectives that for sure, if we don't follow these rules, it will be more easy for our job. I just shared in the link in the chat, sorry, a link of a very interesting example of this situation. It was in Homs in Syria, and one of the operators was recording latitude and longitude of the beneficiaries in a rebel area in Syria. So it was one of the companies that one of my contacts they made some SQL injection testing to the systems, and they got access to the latitude and longitude of some of the beneficiaries, the most of the beneficiaries. So that is a huge problem at the end, on regard of the question, and this is something that is okay, is operational. We need a system that must be working, but also we need to test. We need to follow these kind of rules for we have this humanitarian like basis thing that is do not harm. If the things that you are doing are not improving the situation, or at least keeping the situation for the affected people in the same way, don't do anything. So in information management, that is exactly the situation. So we have like this, as I said, you need to take decisions. You
Exactly.
must. Yes, sorry, I'm finishing. So, you need to take decisions, but you need to advocate, as you said, to the humanitarian country team, the humanitarian responders, to everybody. We need to follow these rules, and and this is something that is you can adjust based on the reality. And what I see is if everybody is aware of that, and everybody want to do that, because all of us are humanitarians, all of us want to improve the life of the people, um, everything can happen, and it's fantastic to have the guidance because it's something that helps us to move forward. Sorry for this long answer, but I think that it helps. Over to you.
It was well worth it, Luis. Thank you so much. And I think that's a really great segue now into the final part of the discussion, where we'll look at sort of broader strategies for implementation in terms of how we do this balancing. And you and I have the same instinct to make this motion with our hands, because that's what it is. It's a balancing of consequences. It is not one set of questions that we can walk through every time. It's not one set of risks and benefits every time. We really need to look at this dynamically. Part of that is thinking about who needs to be involved. So as we shift to thinking about strategies for implementation, Jos, I want to come back to you quickly before then heading to Katrin and Rizky to tell us a little bit about who, in your experience in different countries, has been or should be involved in implementing either, the development of an ISP or other actions for data responsibility. Who's got to be part of this process?
Absolutely. Thanks, Stuart. And I'll keep this really brief. And so first of all, I would say it really, of course, depends on the level that we're talking about, right? So there's these 3 different levels of implementing actions for data responsibility within an organization, cluster, or sector, and then at the system-wide level. At the system-wide level, since I was speaking to that earlier, this is really a very collaborative approach that's needed to get like broad agreement on these system-wide documents. In the case of an ISP, for example, that's involving the intersector or intercluster working group, the information management working group, then bringing something for endorsement to the HCT, making sure that everyone in the response is briefed on the contents of such a document. So it really needs to be very, very broad involvement. Key to remember there is that this is not about information management only, right? So data responsibility is not something that's specific to information management. This touches on all areas of humanitarian response, including so the roles that typically aren't very technical or focused on information management, such as the humanitarian affairs officer, right? So really any area of humanitarian response these days touches on data management and needs to be aware of data responsibility and involved in the development of this guidance. Maybe the sort of final point to make here is not just about who is involved, but also at what step, right? So sequencing the feedback that's received on a document is really key to getting to endorsement, not sharing a draft document with all actors in a response at the same time, but really doing so in quite a strategic and targeted and sequenced way. I think I'll leave it at that.
Great.
Thanks.
Brilliant, Joost. Thanks so much for that. And so now as we move into this in the final 7 minutes of our session, which we knew, of course, would fly by, we want to keep these different strategies for implementation in mind. So I think a good summary of the point Joost is making here is that data responsibility is everybody's responsibility. Of course, it will depend on the action and the context that you're focused on, but this is something that everyone needs to understand the importance of, and everyone needs to understand the relevance of to their own work. So we really hope to continue through discussions like this and articulating that. Katrien, you've been thinking about these issues well before the formation of the DRWG and even the endorsement of the operational guidance, both in your role at DRC and also through your work on protection information management through PIM. So I'd love to hear now from you about some of the strategies you see either emerging or being kind of validated from the past through our current work on implementing the operational guidance.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Stuart, and good afternoon, morning, evening, everyone. A pleasure to be here, and I have 3 reflections to share, and it actually follows the operational guidance in terms of, first, from an operational organizational perspective, as DRC is an operational NGO. The operational guidance has provided a lot of opportunities for us as an organization of joining and bringing closer together our various work streams and efforts on data protection, on personal data, GDPR compliance, the PIM work that you're referring to, Stuart, on our many years now on protection information management work as a co-lead, and more importantly and broadly, all the work we do on what we call program data, the data from and about affected people. And this has been a great opportunity because moving away from the more siloed focus on data protection, data sharing, data security, but with the label of data responsibility, that has actually enabled us to come further together. And with that very concept of data responsibility as the overarching frame that can bring us together in our various parts of the organization, and that whole shared language and vocabulary that we have. So really enabling us moving forward, also bringing the organizational data and the program data closer together and these efforts in a more joined up manner. Secondly, from a PIM, protection information management perspective as the co-lead, I mean, there are indeed, and that continues to be, great complementarity between the protection information management framework and the operational guidance. So the guidance has taken on board several PIM framework elements with the PIM principles, the PIM process, the data sharing framework in practice, and so forth. And I think what the operational guidance really adds is that really taking a step further with the more hands-on templates, tools, as we heard from Rachel earlier, in terms of moving walking the talk, so to speak, on data responsibility. So also moving forward with the PIM initiative, we are in the midst of defining our new PIM strategic framework for the coming years. And I see great opportunities here of complementarity and synergies, including also updating some of the PIM components, the capacity building materials, the learning opportunities with the sort of really strong data responsibility elements. So lastly, my last point is around being a co-chair of the DRWG. Again, moving forward, I see great opportunities of using the operational guidance, which has only been a little more than a year into existence, but using that to further target and address these challenges that we do indeed face of data responsibility, data breaches, and data protection issues, data sharing issues, but addressing that in real time. So what we have already done in the past year is that we had a talk, for example, on a thematic issue of biometrics. We had a more recent talk on Ukraine. And I think indeed there is a great opportunity to continue these real time and being of relevance and support to the operational reality out there. So lastly, I wanted to recognize also what you said, Stuart, about that momentum that we have right now with this high level recognition of the importance of protecting people's data and protecting people with whose data we are collecting and managing and using. So we have an opportunity together jointly, now that we have this concept of data responsibility defined, to mobilize our respective senior managements around this and really take this forward in a more joint and collected manner. Thank you, Stuart and everyone, and handing back to you.
Thank you, Catherine. That's really a critical set of reflections here, and I think great inspiration for your co-chairs as well as the broader audience. Rizky, I'd love to come to you next to hear from both IOM's perspective and also the lens of the work that you lead under DTM, what other strategies you might want to flag for the audience as we then head into the kind of wrap up for the panel. But over to you.
Thank you, Stuart. I'll try to be brief. I hope you can hear me well. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Muhammad Rizky. Everybody calls me Rizky, and I'm the Global Coordinator for the Displacement Tracking Metrics here at IOM. Thanks for having me today. I would like to start with a quote. So Ted Lasso said, taking on a challenge is a lot like riding a horse. If you're comfortable while you're doing it, you're probably doing it wrong. So I would like to consider data responsibility to be one of our biggest challenge for all of us. We are used to working in emergencies where we just go and jump, and we rarely take a moment as we need to be fast. On the data front, we collect all the data we can get to support the humanitarian operations on the ground, making sure the right assistance goes to the right people. We keep the principles of do no harm close to our heart, but with all the continuous advancement of technology and data at its current pace, we might not have the knowledge or full extent to what our work could potentially cause harm to the very same population that we are trying to help. Now, IOM, this is the thought of why IOM is heavily invested and committed on this particular work. DTM operations span across more than 85 countries. We have a network of hundreds of thousands of community level key informants, thousands of field data collectors, hundreds of experts working on data, producing analysis and report on a daily basis. We work in very sensitive contexts with populations that are very vulnerable. And data responsibility is the thing that keeps us all up at night, I have to say. How do we take this on? Back to the horse-related quote. I think we have to start from the feeling of insecurity, uncomfortable. We need to think from the point of view of what risks that we could bring by doing our data work. Secondly, we also have to consider that data responsibility is not only the responsibility of the staff working on data, it's the responsibility of everyone involved, from the project manager, from the project assistant to the head of operations, head of the country office, individually and collectively, from top to bottom and bottom to top. This is how we should frame our mind. And finally, consider this, we should consider all of this as just the beginning. because we have to accept that we are playing a catch-up game here, and we will continue playing catch-up because the technology and the possibility moves faster than our efforts to try to anticipate all of those. So the only way is to work together. We must stay vigilant and consider data responsibility. I think some of the panelists have mentioned this, to consider data responsibility in every aspect of our work, not only data work, because we accept that data is in every aspect of our, we call evidence-based response right now. And our goal is not only to deliver a system, but more importantly, to do no harm. Thanks again for having me here, and I wish all the best for the DRWG going forward. Over to you, Stuart.
Brilliant, Rizky. Thank you so much. That's, I think, a great note to end on, and we are already a few minutes over, so I won't take more time trying to summarize all the excellent points and examples that have been shared here. I just want to give a couple quick next steps for the audience to be aware of regarding the work of the DRWG, and then we will send you all on your way. So one of the key commitments in the operational guidance itself is that every 2 years we will work to revise this document to make sure that it remains fit for purpose, reflects lessons learned, like those that have been shared here today, and also responds to emerging risks and opportunities. We will be initiating that process in the months ahead, and so again, we encourage people to join the DRWG or at least reach out to learn more about that revision process so that we can engage you in what will be, of course, a complex but really critical process. The next piece is that we do, of course, as Katrine mentioned, organize thematic conversations for our membership on different issues of common interest. And I think based on this discussion today, it's clear that there's value in having more regular discussions about concrete examples of how this operational guidance is supporting data responsibility in practice. I will go out on a limb and commit on behalf of the co-chairs that we can organize events such as this on a regular basis, perhaps quarterly or every 4 months, so that we can continue to bring a broader community together to share experience and learn from each other. This is really why we started this group, and in the spirit of HMPW, we want to leverage the power of this global network at both a global and operational level to continue to learn together and do the best that we can to deliver on safe, ethical, and effective data management. Finally, to Rizky's point about doing no harm, this is a journey of discovery, and we should remain uncomfortable, right? We don't have all the answers. This is about deliberation and reflecting together in real time, as we've seen in the Ukraine crisis, to understand how contexts evolve and how this should inform responsible data management. So again, we really would encourage you to connect with us, join the DRWG, and bring your expertise both individually and institutionally to the table. I've tried to respond to the questions that were dropped into the chat via the chat. We will bring those questions back to our membership and make sure to address them in due course. And I will, before closing the webinar, share the link to the DRWG page on ReliefWeb, where you can learn more about this group and also have access to the form to seek membership in the DRWG. So with that, oops, it's already there. One step ahead of me as usual here. So let me just thank our panelists, Luis, Nina, and Jos. Thank you so much for sharing your expertise. And Katrine and Rizky, thank you for those closing reflections. I think it's been a really rich discussion, and we appreciate everybody joining us today and look forward to connecting with you soon in a forum like this, or ideally at the next DRWG quarterly meeting. Thank you all, and take care.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.